Because the question I have then for you guys is really this, okay? So obviously absent hiring somebody like us who is very honest and forthright in looking at media, because we don't charge on the basis of media, okay, the way agencies do. So there's this incestuous relationship, I'd argue, between media and agencies, in that the real business that agencies are in is selling media. So, you know, they're going to create the awesome commercial because they want you to buy television time, or they're going to create the awesome outdoor because they want you to buy outdoor. And they're really not so much interested in, does this particular piece work in this particular location? Because in the aggregate, especially given the clients that they're dealing with, in the aggregate, it all works out in their favor, or not, and in 18 to 24 months they move on. But for a CMO, I mean, basically, you know, the notion is buyer beware. So how do I then, if I'm the CMO, okay, and I realize, first of all, every media company that comes to me is like, look, I got the greatest media under the sun, and you'll reach a quadrillion people, and, you know, it costs X. Okay, everybody's making that pitch. The challenge, right, for them is, okay, so what do I buy and where? Absent hiring somebody like us, Chris, what's like a rudimentary process they got to look at and say, here's the data I got, here's what I know, here's what I don't know, and now I'm ready to buy media. How would I go through that process?
Troy did mention one thing about what if you've never entered a particular market or you're trying to see the new share. I start with the sales data. It doubles the efficiency of what you're doing. Really, truly having the hard understanding the customer and understanding the market segments, you're naturally going to be able to find a lot on that customer. There's a lot of different resources you can tap into once you look at where your sales are coming from, both not only location, but even in simple surveys, observing what they're buying, what kind of products they're buying, and just doing some of the basics. Get beyond demographics. Get beyond just the obvious. Get into more of the, what are the triggers? Sometimes, again, that could be from surveying your customers. So do some very basic things. I would say 9 out of 10 times where I have the biggest problem is the sales data is not clean. It hasn't been organized well. Nobody's really done the due diligence on even keeping it properly. We ran into a customer, a very large multi-billion-dollar client that actually has less than 5% of their sales data. They actually know who the end customer actually is. 95% is hidden by their resellers. So they have a huge problem with really understanding who they're selling to. And the reason why they approached us is they're losing track of what their customers want. Well, no kidding. So if you don't really know who you're selling to, you really don't know what to develop next. That's a huge component. Start there.
So examine my data, attempt to figure out what kind of triggers motivate the decision to purchase, and then begin thinking about where I can influence that process, and then start to look at media.
Yes.
Okay.
And it's an emphasis on, high emphasis on understand your sales data. It is monumental just how many companies they collect something, but what they collect is not enough. It's not enough. They really don't truly understand their customer. They haven't gone through these hard steps. Or some of the larger companies, I run into the problem of the sales data is so siloed that even within the organization itself, they can't get to the data they need. They can't get permission. And for instance, it could be, just having zip+4 knowledge, or even zip code knowledge, what SKUs are selling in what zip codes, and being able to convert that into a density. That is so valuable right there, but there are so few companies that actually collect data like that. The ones that do, move on to the next step. Convert that data and understand what kind of neighborhoods, what are the other products that they're buying in those neighborhoods. Some even simple information is just to go to Google. Start noodling around with what are the things you sell, and start trying to profile and understand the neighborhoods, the commonalities between product and location, product and behaviors.
So Troy, let me bounce this to you for a minute. So your entire life and career at agencies and the big agency has been, we've got a product, come up with a way to sell it, right? And you had to guess or make some sort of, I shouldn't say guess, you make a reasoned hypothesis about what these triggers could be, what's going to motivate the benefit to make the purchase, and, you know, a lot of your career was being very successful about reading the minds of individuals you never met. If Chris gives you that type of data, how then is your advertising approach going to be more effective in your mind?
You know, my mom used to ask me, it's a classic story, what do you do for a living? You know, advertising, nobody knows what you actually do. And I said, well, you know, it's pretty easy, Mom, to predict what a crowd of people will do. Big enough crowd, you can predict with some accuracy what a crowd of people will likely do. It's almost impossible to predict what an individual will do. And I always use the analogy of people doing the wave in a stadium. Once the wave starts in a stadium, almost everybody joins in because it's fun, it's easy, it's not that big a deal. It's kind of like buying a candy bar. Yeah, it's not that big a deal. I'll make an idiot out of myself for 2 seconds, and then it's over. And there's a few stubborn people who sit in their chair and won't join in. But for the most part, 60,000 people are doing the same thing. And that's what mass marketing was all about. It was like, yeah, I pretty much know what a big, large group of people are going to do. I can predict that based on some very common sort of qualities that they share. Their moms, their dads, they love sports, whatever that may be. It was pretty broad-based. Well, today, there is no large crowd. The crowds are all splintered off into doing whatever they want to do, and there's very few large crowds left. So guessing has become increasingly hard. We're getting closer and closer to trying to guess what an individual might do, not a group. And I think that's where the human, you have to have some intuition into human nature, and you also have to have real learning, because I'll tell you, I've been caught on the wrong side of that intuition quite a lot. Like when I worked on Carnival Cruise Lines, we started doing digital advertising very early, and I was convinced to my core that a little banner ad that showed people enjoying themselves on the beach with blue water and white sand, that ad was going to outdraw the same ad done with a picture of a big white boat. And I was dead wrong, because I didn't understand how people bought cruises. I thought, based on human nature, people were buying the fantasy of a romance on the beach, let's say, or just frolicking on the beach. But that's not how people search for cruise vacations. They searched for cruises. They didn't search for vacations. See, in the cruise business, we like to call them cruise vacations, but people looked for cruises. They weren't looking for vacations. They were looking for cruises. So the ad that showed a cruise boat outdrew the ad that showed the happy people on the beach like 10 to 1.
Well, that would kind of buck, though, the traditional notion of advertising from agencies, right? I mean, essentially, your ad of people laying on the beach, you know, with kind of like the Corona-esque, you know, type of setting, that's selling the benefit, not the product, which is something that advertising tries to do.
Every time. But I was dead wrong, because of the way people shopped for that particular item was different than I imagined.
So Troy, to add to that, 10 years ago, we had a cruise client also, and we actually took their direct mail file. We protected the individual names, took that out, and we got some broad street information, and we converted it to latitude, longitude. And behold, we discovered something really, really important, that for this particular cruise line, the people that converted and became really profitable lifetime value customers, and it was a good segment, a good large number of people, that they could see water from their house. They were not in the desert. They were not in farmland. They could see rivers, streams, lakes, and the ocean. And if I limited digital marketing to areas where they could see water, that media performed 5 times better.
They were already disposed to life on the water, water activities, water lifestyle. They'd been on a boat. I mean, I've run into a lot of Midwesterners who've never been on a boat.
And so we saw this pattern, but to solve the problem about being on the wrong side, we tested it. And so we tested in very, very small, so like you're talking about that huge stadium, can I get section 314, rows 9 through 12 to do it? Can I convince just that little row and isolate them out from the other people? And if I can get them to do the wave, then I'm going to test it beyond that and more until finally I'm willing to test the entire stadium.
Wouldn't that include wouldn't you have to kind of include this enthusiasm factor? Because like people in the dog pound and Cleveland Stadium, they're going to be more willing to do the wave, whereas people who are in a skybox, they're going to be less likely.
Sure.
They're there.
Oh, absolutely. That's a segment. Those are segments.
It's a free ticket. I'm here on a corporate giveaway, and whereas the Dogtown guy's there every week, and he's all dressed up, and he's a real fan.
Yeah, absolutely. Those are two segments. So yes, you would not just do the stadium, but you have to then. The analogy doesn't hold up because inside of that little small pack of people, when we test, say, the southwest side of Kansas City, or we're going to limit not just speaking to everybody in that segment, but we're going to use certain publishers, search terms, whatever, to narrow down to a not only geocentric location, but to really narrow onto just a segment of the population. We're going to find great enough density of these people where they're seeing each other. They're being influenced by each other in the real world outside of digital. And that influence allows us to, well, the example is if you see your neighbor has one, if you see one at work, you might want one also, or you might want one similar, or I can convince you to buy something similar. But if it's nobody's ever seen one, nobody's ever purchased one, it's impossible. That's the cruise line example.
True. Yeah, that's exactly true. Like where I live, you don't ever see a Lamborghini. Right? It just doesn't. Those cars just don't exist here. But when I go visit my daughter who lives in Miami, there's one on every corner. And suddenly I find myself wanting a Lamborghini.
Exactly,
wow,
and that's the
really
point.
Cool.
That's the behavioral, and that data is becoming available. And being able to normalize that data and connect it as best you can to clean sales data is a wonder for business. It creates clarity, and it creates consensus of the question. You know what to do next. You start to see some obvious things, what to do next, and predict and prescribe these next steps.
So the joke in advertising has been, I know that 50% of my advertising budget does nothing. I just don't know which 50%. It sounds like essentially we're getting to the point where we can know where the 50% is that actually delivers the sales. And so then the challenge then for CMOs, right, is to be bold and put 100% of your money in the 50%.
That is bold.